This one is so on the nose, bro. If you deny white supremacy is a fucking psyop. White supremacy only exists to keep working class whites from becoming class conscious and advocating for their rights as workers. I've been interacting with these people's content for weeks, and it's like rotting my brain. I've had to watch hours and hours of Nick Fuentes and Tucker Carlson and Charlie Kirk speaking. So I really hope somebody out there gets something out of this video once it's finally uploaded, because holy shit, did I hurt myself to make it for you. This is self-harm, people. American white supremacy was on the scene long before the Nazis ever showed up. Unlike any other form of xenophobia or prejudice that came before it, it was unique even to the Nazis.
Matter, we should talk about genetics more. It's not racist to say that.
What do you mean by that?
So what did Charlie mean when he said that? It might have sounded innocuous to most people. Genetics are important, right? But to me, and maybe I'm just paranoid, but to me, it kind of sounded like a dog whistle. I'm going to break down why I say that. To do that, I'm going to take you on a little bit of a field trip through history. But first, I want to do a little bit of devil's advocate, and I want to tell you a little bit about my political journey. If you want to get straight to the history part, then I'll put timestamps in the doobly-doo, and you can click around. Or you can jump straight ahead to where I actually do the breakdown of the dog whistles, because I'm going to do history for like 30 minutes. I don't think all conservatives are white supremacists. I don't think all conservatives are Nazis. I do think that the Conservative Party from the top down espouses white supremacist ideology. Honestly, I don't think, for the most part, people are even engaged in politics deeply enough to be seeing this type of video. I don't think most people are on the internet, in the corners of the internet where hour-long political think pieces are getting recommended to them. Most people don't even follow the news. Now, it might seem confusing that I say that I don't think all conservatives are white supremacists, but I think that the conservative movement is white supremacist. Don't get me wrong, there are for sure like some true believers in there. But like I said, I think it comes top down, and I think that they use a lot of dog whistles and a lot of coded language to the point where people who aren't paying close attention, people who are not like deep into politics, don't even really know what they're hearing. I'm just gonna read the script, so if I'm not making eye contact with you, I apologize. I think that, the average conservative just kind of thinks that law and order sounds good, illegal immigration is bad, it's against the law, so it must be bad. I think most people just kind of get their politics from their parents and don't really think about it too deeply. And even in our most controversial, contentious elections, we're lucky if we get 2/3 of people out to vote. Most of us, like I said, just don't think it's that deep. But then there's people like me and people who spend all freaking day online consuming political content. I am totally aware of the fact that I live in a left-wing echo chamber. As a matter of fact, I made it a point to put myself here on purpose after the 2024 election went the way that it did. But I got my start online during the anti-SJW season of politics. I remember watching people like Ben Shapiro and his destroying college students with facts and logic genre of video. I was around when that movement was, the top of the political discourse. I was around when the movement began to splinter. Some of them drifted to the left, some of them drifted to the right. Some of them just started talking about things besides politics. And then I was around when white nationalism became the new topic. I was watching channels like Sargon of Akkad. I was watching channels like Black Pigeon Speaks. And once it started to recommend me people like Stefan Molyneux and Richard Spencer, I knew that I had gone a little bit too deep into this rabbit hole. Then I decided to leave my conservative echo chamber and I jumped into a liberal one, started watching people like Destiny. I was around for the rise of Hassan Piker coming out of DGG. I was around for the rise of Vosh coming out of DGG. Kind of seen a little bit of it all. Shit, I was around when Nick Fuentes came out of DGG. So in this video, I'm going to argue that there's a pretty direct link to white supremacist movements and rhetoric of the past to common conservative talking points and dog whistles today. To do that, I'm going to take you on a little bit of a field trip through history. It'll be long and maybe a little bit meandering, but I promise there's a point if you have the time and the patience to write it out with me. And after I explain to you my understanding of American white supremacist history, I'll watch some clips of modern conservatives and explain why I see what I see when I see clips of them talking. So if you're down, let's go back to the year 1865 to a small town in Tennessee called Pulaski. It's a time of political turmoil. The Civil War has just ended and your state of Tennessee was on the losing side. The reason for this war, to put it simply, was slavery. And I can hear some conservatives who might be watching and saying, oh, it was about states' rights, and you're getting ahead of me. Doing an in-depth discussion of the lost cause is kind of beyond the scope of this video. It's already going to be an hour long. If you want more information on the whole states' rights versus slavery thing, I would recommend you check out a channel called Atunche Films and his series Checkmate Lincolnites. He dives deep into the history of the Civil War using first-hand accounts and is presented in a fun and digestible way, and he wears costumes. So I'll just leave this topic there, and you can go and do your own research on that if you like. Anyway, with the passage of the 13th Amendment and the war officially over, I think we can at least agree that slavery ostensibly ended with it. I think we can also agree that slavery being abolished was a good thing. At least I hope we can still agree on that in 2026. But anyway, back in 1865, the end of slavery was not so popular. For the planters, slavery was a threat to their southern hegemony, and more importantly, their wallets, meaning they were none too pleased about it. Up until now, the economics of slave owning meant that you had a whole class of people you could use to work your plantation who you didn't have to pay. What scared the poor whites, though, was fear of competition. In the words of Lyndon Baines Johnson, if you convince the lowest white man that he's better than the best colored man, he won't notice you're picking his pocket. Hell, give him someone to look down on and he'll empty his pockets for you. If you're already just scraping by, subsisting at the bottom of the white totem pole, it's comforting to know that at least you're not black, At least you're not a slave. Perhaps most frightening to all classes of white, soon after they were freed, the slaves were given the right of full citizenship and the right to vote. The enslaved people of Giles County, Tennessee, where Pulaski is located, made up 40% of the total population there. That means if you were a planter, not only were you losing access to your unpaid labor force, if you were poor, not only did you have twice the economic competition to worry about now, but that competition had the right to vote against your interests. Now they were free to meet in private and perhaps plot against the white man. After centuries of forced servitude and harsh abuse, many white people, rich and poor alike, feared that the former slaves might come for revenge. The Negroes were holding night meetings, were going about, were becoming very insolent, and the Southern people were very much alarmed. Parties organized themselves so as to be ready in case they were attacked. I think that's a quote by Nathan Bedford Forrest. I think it's worth noting here, at least according to historian Vernon Wharton though, the Negroes, largely unarmed, economically dependent, and timid and unresourceful after generations of servitude, would offer no effective resistance to violence, a sentiment that becomes pretty clear if you look at the realities of Reconstruction-era violence, who it was perpetrated by, and who it was perpetrated against. But we're getting ahead of ourselves again. At this point, you might be wondering why I decided to mention Pulaski specifically. It seems like the picture I've been painting so far could just apply to the southern states more broadly, and that's true, but it was in Pulaski that a few men decided to form a club that would go on to have a central role to play in politics, especially southern politics, for the next century. It started as a kind of lighthearted, jovial affair. The men would dress up in ghost costumes and go out at night, getting up to what started as just harmless fun. They would ride on horseback through the darkness, yelling about how they were thirsty and weary from the years of war. Pretty soon, they noticed that a lot of their neighbors were frightened by their antics, especially their black neighbors. Eventually, tales of these ghostly horsemen started to spread across the state, then across the South, and with time their numbers grew. They grew far beyond the 6 that they started with to dozens, and then hundreds, and then thousands, and the Ku Klux Klan was born. And in April of 1867, former Confederate General Nathan Bedford Forrest was elected as the first Imperial Wizard. The first iteration of the Klan, while it did have some higher society members in the leadership ranks, was made up largely of Confederate soldiers and low and working class white people afraid of an uprising of the freedmen. Representatives of different clans from all across the state were sent to the meeting, and at the end, the Klan had some kind of order once it had elected Forrest. Before this, the Klan had kind of been a free-for-all. But with the Imperial Wizard now in place at the helm of the Empire, it was officially divided into realms, dominions, provinces, and dens, each with their own respective leaders. Grand dragons, titans, giants, and cyclopses, each den composed of ghouls. It kind of sounds more like a Dungeons & Dragons game than a hate group, doesn't it? But make no mistake, the Ku Klux Klan would go on to be the most infamous terrorist group in United States history. The harmless antics of the early Klan quickly became violence, intimidations, beatings, murders. These were the new activities of the Klan. In the century after it was born, the Klan would be involved in thousands of murders, thousands more beatings, and hundreds of bombings. They sought to break the backs of the new Reconstruction government, which was a kind of martial law that had been placed on the South through the Reconstruction Acts, and to return the South to a state of what the Klansmen would call law and order. Law and order to the Klan translated to the return of status quo, a return to black people being subservient. The mission of the Klan became to prevent the enfranchisement of black people, to instill so much terror that they wouldn't be willing to exercise their new rights and wouldn't dare attempt any violent reprisals. The Klan was afraid of racial equality under the law, but more than that, they feared being dominated by the newly freed people, the same way that they had become accustomed to dominating them. Black people weren't the only targets of the Klan, though, far from it. In its first iteration, it was focused mainly on continuing the oppression of black people, but in addition to tormenting the freedmen directly, they also took aim at members of the surrounding political apparatus, attacking and intimidating election officials, Republican politicians, activists, voters, black and white alike. The Klan was quite successful in its goal of suppressing support for the Republicans, who were the liberal pro-civil rights party at the time, and pretty much achieved its goal of intimidating black people back into submission. When the fall elections of 1868 came, the Republicans had lost 90% of their vote share in Oglethorpe County, Tennessee. 1,100 votes in the spring, down to 116 once the Klan had had their way. In Columbia County, the tally shrank from 1,122 to just 1. With its mission accomplished and its reputation beginning to publicly slide because of the increasing levels of violence, many of the higher society members in the leadership of the Klan began to resign. Imperial Wizard Forrest in January of 1869 officially disbanded the Klan, and that was the end of it, for a while. The Klan would be revived in 1915 by Colonel William Joseph Simmons, probably inspired by the smash hit film The Birth of a Nation, which would premiere the same year, and chronicled a decidedly whitewashed version of the events of the first Klan. And a side note, to give you an idea of the temperature of the country when it came to race issues in 1915, a half century after the end of the Civil War, The Birth of a Nation was shown in the White House to the sitting president, his entire family, and his cabinet. President Woodrow Wilson was reportedly very moved when he saw the film. After seeing it, he said, "It was like writing history with lightning, and my only regret is that it is all so terribly true." And I want to reiterate here that it absolutely was not so terribly true. I won't dive deep into the plot of the film. Again, this is not a Lost Cause video. But it portrayed the Klan as heroes rather than the terrorists that they actually were, and even went so far as to portray black people as having been better off under slavery and being not unhappy. By the time the film was pulled from theaters, it had grossed almost $18 million domestically. Adjusted for inflation, that is almost $600 million. Had The Birth of a Nation come out in 2025 and performed the same way, it would have been the biggest blockbuster hit of the year. But it's only a rumor that the film is what inspired Simmons. If you ask the man himself, he said he'd had the idea for 20 years already. It had come to him in a vision, quote, "On horseback, in their white robes, they rode across the wall in front of me. As the picture faded out, I got down on my knees and swore that I would found a fraternal organization that would be a memorial to the Ku Klux Klan." He originally called his new club the High Class Order for Men of Intelligence and Character. It started similarly to other fraternal organizations at the time, such as the Masons and the Oddfellows, except despite the high-class branding, Simmons' order attracted a decidedly middle and working class membership. Like the first Klan, there certainly were some members of higher society in leadership positions, but the rank-and-file men were made up largely of guys with day jobs like mechanic and farmer and the like. This fraternity was based on what Simmons would call comprehensive Americanism. He would elaborate on what he meant by that when he sat down at a meeting with his Georgia realm. He started the meeting by saying, "Now let the niggers, Catholics, Jews, and all others who disdain my imperial wizardry come on." He said later, what were the dangers which the white men saw threatening to crush and overwhelm Anglo-Saxon civilization? The dangers were in the tremendous influx of foreign immigration, tutored in alien dogmas and alien creeds, flowing from all climes and slowly pushing the native-born white American population into the center of the country, there to be ultimately overwhelmed and smothered. Is this starting to sound familiar at all? The Klan was a conservative organization. It sought to enforce its view of morality and religion on the world, and it did so through violence. White supremacy was one of many planks in the platform of the Second Klan, but as Simmons alluded to, the Second Klan was more comprehensive in its view of the world. To the Negro, Jew, Oriental, Roman Catholic, and alien were added dope, bootlegging, graft, nightclubs, roadhouses, violation of the Sabbath, unfair business dealings, sex, marital goings-on, and scandalous behavior, all new concerns for the 100% American. The Klan was always a white supremacist and Protestant-only organization, but was particularly focused on the Catholics in the 1920s because this was the era of Prohibition, and the Catholic Church saw Prohibition as a puritanical overreach. Many Catholic politicians of the day were rejected by the Klan for being wets. As Prohibition ended and the era of organized labor and black civil rights began, the political aims of the Klan would shift and some compromises would begin to be made in that area. Colonel Simmons would go on to hire a publicity agency to help him grow the Klan, and by 1921 it had a roster of upwards of 100,000 members. And similarly to the first Klan, as it grew in numbers, it also grew in its propensity for violence. As their rap sheet mounted and their taxes went unpaid, they began to attract unwanted attention from the media and eventually the government. Before long, Simmons found himself sitting in front of the Rules Committee of the House of Representatives. You might think that this would be a real trouble to the Klan, and you would be wrong. The Imperial Wizard took the stand in his congressional hearing and made a pleasing impression. His appearance was that of a politician of the old school and of the old South, a colonel of the fraternal volunteers. Parrying all questions with good humor and rhetoric, he spoke of how his only intent had been fraternal and benevolent, and of course denied any knowledge of violence conducted under their banner. The Klan came out of this first major brush with the law arguably better off. Their situation was too vague and yet too alarming for cautious politicians to willingly tackle. When the committee chairman, Congressman Philip Campbell of Missouri, was defeated at the next election, many able politicians nodded knowingly. Simmons is quoted as saying, "It wasn't until the newspapers began to attack the Klan that it really grew. Certain newspapers also aided us by inducing Congress to investigate us. The result was that Congress gave us the best advertising we ever had. Congress made us." Estimates vary on the high watermark of the Klan in terms of enrollment, but the press attention that they got after their first investigation led them to grow to at least 2 million. Some sources estimate as high as 4. In a nation of 115 million at the time, that was up to 1 Klansman for every 28 citizens. The Klan stretched from Portland, Maine to Portland, Oregon, from Dallas to Denver to Des Moines, from Philadelphia to Phoenix. Suffice to say, they were a serious force in the United States. There's a couple of points I want to press on a little bit there. When the congressman heading the committee that investigated the Klan came up for re-election, he lost. And it was no secret that it was in large part due to having gone against the Klan. The Klan in this era was indeed made up largely of everyday white workers, but it had people in high places, and was not unpopular in much of the South. Woodrow Wilson was personal friends with Thomas Dixon Jr., who was the writer of The Klansman, the book that The Birth of a Nation was based on. Chief Justice of the Supreme Court Edward White was a member of the first Klan himself, and also met with Dixon to set up a screening for the infamous film. There are many examples of Klan involvement, from the lowest ranks of police to the highest ranks of local, state, and federal government. I could make a video just detailing them, but I digress. The other point I want to linger on briefly is the parrying of all questions with good humor and rhetoric.
Irony is so important for giving a lot of cover and plausible deniability for our views. That's what these people don't understand.
And usually it works perfectly.
Pedophile and kind of a pagan. It's like, well, he was also really fucking cool. So, time to grow up. We're not children anymore. Am I right? Am I right? Am I right, boys? Am I right? Let's go. He was also really fucking cool.
Do you regret saying that?
Saying a fact? No, that's absolutely true.
You think Hitler was very fucking cool?
Yes.
I do.
The edits, it's just cool. The uniforms, the parades, it's cool as a guy. You look at World War II and it's fascinating and it's interesting and it's compelling and it's cool. Lay a hand on a woman unless she deserved it. No, I'm kidding. But see, that's a joke. That's a total joke. I would never raise my hand to a woman unless she had it coming. In which case,
The statement exists in a superposition of sincere and ironic until observation collapses it into whichever is more convenient.
The parrying with good humor will come to be relevant when we take a look at some of our modern commentators, especially Mr. Nick Fuentes. Soon after the congressional investigation, Simmons would be ousted and replaced by Hiram Evans Jr., who would serve until 1939 before being succeeded by James A. Colescott. We'll pick up in his era, and we'll go on a little bit of a field trip to Germany while we're at it. Klan membership numbers never grew beyond their peak in the 20s, but as the labor movement gained steam and the Klan found itself a new opposition, it also found itself new allies in the burgeoning Nazi movement. In the modern day, we kind of lump the Klan and the Nazis together, but it was not always like that. I want to make it clear that American white supremacy was on the scene long before the Nazis ever showed up. In fact, the Knights of the White Camellia, a similar and allied but separate white supremacist group to the Klan, claim that the Nazis actually stole the whole anti-Jewish thing and the infamous salute from them. I can't confirm the veracity of that claim, but what I can tell you is that the Nazis, and not just American neo-Nazis, but the original German variant, were in part inspired by the white supremacy that they saw in the United States. Now that's a strong claim, especially coming from an American. You know, our country loves to brag about beating the Nazis, ignoring what the Russians contributed, but that's a different video. So allow me to flesh that out. In June of 1934, the leading lawyers of the Nazi Party came together to discuss what would come to be known as the Nuremberg Laws, and to respond to the popular Prussian Memorandum, which was a 1933 policy proposal document that had been circulating in Nazi circles. The most radical Nazis present at that meeting, the likes of Roland Freisler, who would go on to be the Nazi People's Court president, and Fritz Grau, who would go on to be a high-ranking SS, were the most ardent champions of the lessons that American approaches held for Germany. Early 20th century America struck Germans as a country at the forefront of the creation of a conscious unity of the white race. Hitler himself praised the American race law system in his infamous Mein Kampf. There were no other countries in the whole of the world who had come up with laws that criminalized interracial marriage. At the time, there were 30 American states with such laws. Fritz Grau, at the 1934 meeting, said, "Other peoples too, one might say, had achieved the goal of racial education and enlightenment through social segregation. Among these other peoples, I am thinking chiefly of North America, which even has statutes along these lines." When it came to race, the Nazis found American law to be instructional if somewhat insufficient. After all, the colored people of the US, namely the black people, were already oppressed and impoverished as well as mostly easily visible and distinct from the white people. German Jews, unlike American blacks, were too wealthy and arrogant. The only hope was that they be put down by severe criminal punishment. Another quote from the 1934 meeting, this one by Gertner, referring to a memo on American law that was being passed around at the meeting. Quote, "The material gives an answer to the question of what form race legislation in the American states takes. The picture is as variegated as the American map. Almost all American states have race legislation. That is not uninteresting, since I believe there is jurisprudence on the question of whether Jews belong to the Caucasian race. Then it is interesting to see what legal consequences are attached to sexual union. That too is variable. It can be seen that civil law consequences attach in all cases and criminal consequences in a great number of cases." I think this is critical to analyze. The American law model is what Nazi lawyers looked at to prove it was even possible to punish people criminally for quote-unquote race mixing. The Nazis regarded America as the premier innovator in race law. Relations between the US and Germany in the 1930s were still cordial, if not outright friendly in certain parts of the country. Nazi observers were particularly hopeful that they could reach out the hand of friendship on the basis of their shared commitment to white supremacy. In addition to law, the two countries also shared an interest in race science. There was an active back and forth between eugenicists in the States and those in Nazi research facilities. They looked to the US as a model in this regard as well. They often cited the work of American eugenicists such as Lothrop Stoddard and Madison Grant. Nazi officials also invoked America when discussing conquests in the Eastern Front, comparing them to the American genocide of Native Americans. In Nazi eyes, the United States ranked alongside the British, quote, to be respected as racial kindreds and builders of a great empire. I want to point out that the Nazis did not praise the US universally. They were ardently against certain aspects of the US law, namely the liberal democratic parts. To their great confusion, the National Socialist Handbook for Law and Legislation. The National Socialist ideology presented here and the conclusions that must be drawn from it have been widely met with complete misunderstanding, and National Socialism and the German folk have been the targets of serious attacks. This is all the more incomprehensible since the United States of North America in particular has introduced statutory regulation in many areas that grow out of the racial point of view. In this regard, it is worth observing that the dominant political ideology in the USA must be characterized as entirely liberal and democratic. With an ideology of that kind, which starts from the fundamental proposition of the equality of all persons who bear a human countenance, it is all the more astonishing how extensive race legislation is in the USA. And Creer makes an astute observation here, that I think that we should remain wary of in America today. America is a dualistic country with roots in both liberal democracy and white supremacy. Liberal democracy, which states that all men are created equal before the law and before God, and white supremacy, which says that some men are created more equal than others. Since its inception, these two philosophies have been at odds with each other. When looking for legal methods of dealing with their Jewish question, the Nazis again turned to America. Minister Gertner said, quote, "It's naturally very attractive to look around in the world to see how this problem has been attacked by other peoples, and the United States provided the only model that the Justice Ministry found to investigate this issue." On the issue, the Nazis found another critique of American law, because it had made no distinction between white people and Jewish people. Yes, the jurisprudence speaks of the Caucasian race simply in opposition to all colored races. That is to say, it speaks of the Jewish race, and since Jews belong to the white race, they are reckoned among the Caucasians. One can see that this legislation is not directed against the Jews, but protects the Jews. However, Roland Freisler, one of the most radical Nazis, found a loophole in this reasoning that was sinister if simple. Freisler said, "It seems to me doubtful that there would be any need to expressly mention the Jews alongside the coloreds. I believe that every judge would reckon the Jews among the coloreds, even though they look outwardly white." And with that, the Nazis had used American law to find a way to justify dividing the Jewish people from the white people, even though there was absolutely no scientific justification for doing so. That was a fact that they admitted themselves. An effective means of determining whether a given human being has an element of Jewishness on the basis of his behavior or outward appearance or blood or the like does not exist, or at least at present has not yet been found, and indeed one had not and would never be found. Despite what some scientific racists might try to convince you of, even today, there is no way biologically to neatly divide humans by race. Race is a social construct, and I'll elaborate on that more once we get back to that Charlie Kirk clip, which I promise is going to happen. But let's keep fleshing out the history, because, spoiler alert, Charlie Kirk was a white supremacist, and Tucker Carlson is a white supremacist, and any other commentator who uses the type of dog whistles that they are is going to get that label. But anyway, let's finish talking about the white supremacists from the last century. As contradictory as it may seem, and it definitely does seem contradictory, but I swear this is true, the Nazis thought that the American one-drop rule, which says that if you have one drop of colored blood, that automatically makes you colored, they thought that that was a little too strict. And they decided themselves that a Jew was someone who had at least 3 grandparents who were Jewish, or had at least 2 grandparents who were Jewish, and also married a Jew and or practiced Judaism. And it may seem as though this video has gotten a little bit off track, but I swear I'm going to get back to the Americans But I just want to make it clear that American white supremacy is unlike any other form of xenophobia or prejudice that came before it. It was unique even to the Nazis, who we like to demonize as the villains of the 20th century, and rightfully so, but even the Nazis, as horrible as they were, took inspiration from the history of the American genocide of the native population, and were inspired by our contemporary laws on race, and even they looked at some parts of our race law and thought that they went a little too far. Now we can get back to America. During the late 30s, there was a prolonged flirtation between the Klan and a growing proliferation of fascist organizations. The names of William Dudley Pelley, Mrs. Leslie Fry, James Edward Smythe, Colonel Ian Sanctuary, General George Van Horn Moseley, and many other front leaders turned up with Klan associations. Some had gotten their start in the Klan. Given the similarities I described in the last section, it should come as no surprise that the Nazis and the Klan began working together, intermingling and sharing ideas back in the States. The Klan began to adopt a decidedly anti-Semitic and conspiratorial worldview from the 1930s onward, a tendency that persists to this day. And what do Nazis hate just as much as Jews? Communists. They kind of see them as one and the same. With the rise of FDR's New Deal, white supremacists in the States, from the American Nazis to the White Camellia to the Klan, began to march, or I guess goose step, in unison, castigating any movement for labor solidarity as a product of the Jew communist conspiracy. As the civil rights movement began to gain steam, the Jew communist offered a fabulously comprehensive catch-all for the white supremacists of any stripe to blame. As time would move forward, they would start intermingling and would become essentially indistinguishable in terms of their beliefs. The civil rights movement would give the Klan the impetus for its last big wave of violence. By the 1940s, the Klan had become the subject of attention not just from Congress and the Bureau of Internal Revenue, but now they had the attention of the FBI. The Klan could count on increasingly few of the friends in high places that it had counted on in the earlier parts of the century, and while it still had a presence in many Southern police forces, they were not looked on too kindly because of their tendency to violence. Make no mistake, the racism of the South was still very virulent, but the middle and upper classes of the white supremacist movement saw fit to abandon the Klan by this time and now made their ranks in organizations like the White Citizens Councils, Federations for Constitutional Government, anti-communist crusades, and regular old party politics. I would add the Heritage Foundation to that list, by the way, but that's another video. While there was a rash of 138 bombings in the 1950s and 60s, as well as several high-profile murders and street clashes, the FBI had become an unstoppable force inside the Klan, with, eyes and ears deep within the Klan ranks. Largely due certainly to the new scrutiny it faced from the Bureau, but also because of the decidedly more successful civil rights movement. It was at this point that the Klan itself began to move more into non-violent political demonstration. Marching, sit-ins, boycotts, leaflets, and stickering began to replace the beatings and murders of old. It's at this point that I want to take a closer look at a man that I would argue has been far more influential than he is given credit for, Mr. David Duke. Duke came to prominence in the 1970s as the new face of the Klan, bringing with him a new style, the clean-cut, well-spoken, well-read version of a Klansman. Duke had to take the path of reasonableness before the media and still managed to hold on to the traditional Klan constituency. In interviews and on TV, he was poised, articulate, low-key, and sincere. Tall, slim, blonde, with razor-cut, blow-dried hair and stylish clothing, David Duke's youthfulness and attractiveness set him off from the rest of the Klan world. Duke's message was thoughtful, polite, and winning. He had no animosity toward any other race. He was only for the rights of white people. The Chicanos had La Raza, blacks had the NAACP, and the Jews had their organizations. No one ever complained about all black fraternities. He was not against black people. He was for white people. Is that starting to sound familiar? Alright, what about this next one? We believe that white people in America face discrimination in employment, promotions, scholarship, college entrance, and union admissions. The only thing missing from that is DEI and critical race theory. Duke lifted the Klan's ban on Catholics and women in his Louisiana Klan. This was soon after the Klan created a presence in St. Augustine, an old Spanish Catholic town, in order to fight black people during the Civil Rights Movement. I would posit that this was instrumental to people like Nick Fuentes, who's a half Hispanic Catholic, or Enrique Tarrio, a Cuban, being successful as mascots of the modern white supremacist and fascist movements. After nominally renouncing his Klan membership, Duke would go on to run for office in Louisiana and actually win a seat in the House of Representatives. He served from 1974 to 1980. Duke did hundreds of TV and radio interviews, earning himself a small fortune in the process while attempting to win converts. The news had a field day with the spectacle of an open former Klansman willing to try to peddle his wares to the middle classes of America. That is until Duke met his match in the New York Times interviewer Wayne King. You sell things, you pass out things called nigger hunting license. No, we do not. I do not pass out. I do not. You do not, but your lieutenants do. Maybe you do. It came from Louis Beam. Well, I don't. He's your Grand Dragon, isn't he? No, he's a Great Titan. It says, having paid the license fee, someone's name is hereby licensed to hunt and kill niggers, in caps, during the open season in Texas. This is beautiful, David. Well, it is a joke. Yes, it is satire. For a guy who says you don't belittle other races, I mean, this is really pretty scurrilous stuff. And pass yourself off as a new Klansman. Here's another one. There's very violent rhetoric in there, and some of the alleged Jewish Rothstein pictures who look like rats. Now that, I think, is excellent satire. I won't read any more of that. I would argue that Duke was much more successful than he is recognized or seems on the surface. While he never won another race after that interview fiasco, he was still competitive in the races he entered, and while official Klan membership never came close to reaching the peaks that it had in the 1920s, I believe it's pretty self-evident that in the modern Republican Party and commentariat, his talking points were pretty salient. At the same time Duke was coming up with his new pitch for the Klan's version of white supremacy, the Republican Party was starting to make its transition to what I would argue is a white supremacist platform as it adopted its Southern strategy.
It's hard. I won't hear it. You start out in 1954 by saying by 1968 you can't say nigger. That hurts your backfire, so you say stuff like forced busing, states' rights and all that stuff. And you're getting so abstract now, you're talking about cutting taxes and all of these things you're talking about are totally economic things, and the byproduct of them is blacks get hurt worse than white. Because obviously sitting around saying we want to cut taxes, we want to cut this, and we want is much more abstract than even the busing thing, and a hell of a lot more abstract than nigger.
Lee Atwater, the man who said that quote, worked on the campaigns of both President Reagan and President Bush. My thesis in this video is pretty much that the modern conservative movement is essentially white supremacist and neo-fascist, and so I'll keep my Southern strategy argument in that lane, but there is a solid argument to be made that the hard right stance the Republican Party has taken on religion and women's rights are part and parcel of the same strategy. If you're interested in learning more about that, I highly recommend the book The Long Southern Strategy by Angie Maxwell and Todd Shields. The first inklings of the Southern strategy came once Jim Crow came into question on the national stage. In 1948, Senator Strom Thurmond, an arch segregationist, ran independently in an attempt to split the Democratic presidential party ticket in a movement that came to be known as the Dixiecrats. While Thurmond was unsuccessful in his bid for the presidency, he managed to win 4 states in the Deep South, all former Confederate states, giving Democrats quite a fright for a third-party ticket. 4 states might not sound like much, but to put it in perspective, the last time any third-party candidate won any states at all was George Wallace in 1968, another staunch segregationist, who won 5 states, again all former Confederate states. When Wallace ran his 1968 campaign, Thurmond was still active in politics. He knew he stood no chance against Wallace running on segregation, and he knew that Barry Goldwater, who had run a conservative Republican platform in 1964, managed to win only a smattering of conservative states, just like Thurmond himself had done 20 years before. The sitting president at the time was Democratic incumbent Hubert Humphrey, who himself had been a champion of the new Democratic Civil Rights platform back in 1948. Thurmond saw an opportunity here and hatched a plan to take the middle ground. On a fateful day in 1968, Thurman and Republican candidate Richard Nixon met in Atlanta in a hotel room. Republican Party operatives to this day claim that the two met only to discuss issues of national security, but the more cynical amongst us believe that Thurman traded his endorsement of Nixon for Nixon's benign neglect of civil rights enforcement. Nixon, notably up to this point, had run a decidedly progressive platform, befriending civil rights leaders like Martin Luther King and Roy Wilkins. After his meeting with the segregationists, however, he pivoted away from civil rights. Rather than taking on the openly racist stylings of the segregationist candidates, Nixon instead opted to adopt a much more coded language. He ran on a platform of states' rights, a thinly veiled endorsement of segregation, and law and order, a pretty clear callback to the Klan. And when Nixon made his pivot, Thurman pleaded to his followers, "I know you want to vote for Reagan, the true conservative, but if Nixon becomes president, he has promised that he won't enforce either the Civil Rights or the Voting Rights Acts if you stick with him." With Thurman's endorsement, Nixon went on to narrowly win the election. And yes, Ronald Reagan ran such a conservative platform in his 1968 run that before his opponent was endorsed by a popular segregationist, he was the frontrunner for segregationist voters. While Nixon would still concede many of the Confederate states to the hardliner Wallace, he would go on to set the stage for the modern conservative Republican platform we've seen from then on. The Solid South was still skeptical of the Republican Party, the party of Lincoln, the party of Reconstruction, but as the Democratic Party leaned more and more into progressivism and civil rights, the Confederate states would shift redder and redder. While it was sometimes one step forward and another back, as the Democrats ran Southern candidates of their own like Carter and Clinton, the overall trend of Republican Party dominance in the South is undeniable. So yeah, I think that the modern Republican Party uses coded language and routinely harkens back to the days of the Klan and segregation. Common talking points like states' rights, law and order, and make America great again are all barely disguised appeals to racists that are just vague enough to not be picked up by normies. Now that I've given you the background of how someone like me views the Republican Party, I'm going to go ahead and deconstruct and respond to the dog whistles I hear in the modern conservative commentary.
By the way, genetics matter. We should talk about genetics more. It's not racist to say that. So my genetics.
This is probably going to be the clip that I'm going to have the strongest opinion on, especially in conjunction with another clip that I'm going to show you. This is like the loudest dog whistle in this video, maybe, because it's very obvious what he's doing here. Genetics matter. It's not racist to say that. What is he implying there? What Charlie's implying is, well, first of all, he goes on to talk about how his genetics come from like Scotland and Ireland, and therefore he is like rebellious and pushes the status quo and so on and so forth. He's implying that genetics determine what kind of person you are, which, you know, if you are a white supremacist, which I do believe Charlie is, what he's saying there, obviously he's bragging about his own superior genetics in comparison to who? Comparison to people who look like this and other shades of brown. And to elaborate on that, I'm going to follow this up actually directly.
The start will eventually be at a higher position.
The only solution would be an IQ test, and the left hates IQ tests. IQ tests are a great way to bring back true meritocracy because IQ tests are study and preparation agnostic. So, are you familiar with an intelligent quotient test?
Yeah. And
but they don't like it because the left says they're racist because, I mean, you can read Charles Murray's bell curve why they don't like it.
Yeah,
But would you agree we should bring back IQ tests?
I believe in the...
Charles Murray's bell curve came out in the 90s, and Charlie is very politically astute. He knows exactly what he's implying here, again, as he has in every single one of these clips. Now, he's going a little bit mask off. What he's almost coming right out and saying it. He's saying you should read Charles Murray's bell curve if you want to know why the left doesn't like IQ tests. I can tell you what Charles Murray's bell curve is. Charles Murray's bell curve is essentially a book that heavily implies that race is a determining factor in IQ. It implies that African Americans, black people, Africans, have a lower IQ based on their race. That is what Charlie is saying here. He's saying that black people wouldn't be able to get into colleges or admitted into offices of prestige if it wasn't for DEI. He's saying the quiet part pretty fucking loud right here. He's saying that black people are genetically inferior. He's saying that black people are stupid. Charles Murray's book, by the way, is completely panned by the scientific community. It's not even peer-reviewed. So as I established previously in this video, there's a long history of eugenics and scientific racism in the United States of America. So much so that Nazi Germany looked to America as an inspiration in that respect and even collaborated with us on some of their little projects. This, what he's implying here, is a pretty obvious dog whistle to racial genetics.
But to some extent, I just noticed that living in a predominantly black city and then spending part of the year in an entirely white area that had been deindustrialized, you saw kind of similar, you saw lots of million differences. Well, there's no violence in the all-white area, for one thing, which I'm grateful for.
It always comes back to this. The implication is always that black people and like North African Arabs, you know, that entire part of the world, the quote-unquote third world, are just naturally genetically violent. That's why those parts of the world are messed up. That's why there is so much gang violence in the United States, is because black people are just violent. That's just the way they are genetically. That is the implication that he is making there.
Not all economics. I want to be very clear. But some of those, it's...
You're making me so radical that my first thought was, make them a militia, Charlie.
No. No, but,
arm them. No, sorry.
But disavow. No.
Disavow. You disavow that
yes,
completely.
That's right.
I'm the lunatic here, not you. You are very, you've got a future.
Yeah, okay.
I don't think that Tucker is really kidding here, you know? I think that groups like Patriot Front and groups like the Proud Boys, I think that Tucker is a genuine fan of these groups. I don't think that Tucker is joking here. I think that Tucker is pretty serious. To joke about that in such a way is telling.
Weird stuff.
No, I agree.
They almost have this strange fetish in London that they like being conquered.
Oh, yeah.
That they're like enjoying the slow motion rape of their
Invade
country.
me harder.
No, like
Daddy.
It's like, no, seriously.
Oh, I agree.
It's like this weird sexual
I
attitude.
agree.
Like, yes, Islamist, you know, come into my country. Like, what?
No.
And it's just, I don't know what that is.
I want to say, first of all, that weird cucking sexual shit, projection. There's no one is thinking about that except for you guys. So, you know, you can take from that what you will. As far as the language of invasion, I think that this is so hilarious, the language of invasion, because these are the same people who will fucking suck the market off day and night. The market. But, and of course, it's once their white supremacist ideals feel threatened that finally they're willing to do something about the market. And what are they willing to do about the market? And of course, not actually put any restraints on the market. They just want to take away the labor force that the market has been fucking shipping in.
I don't know. There's something about mass immigration that degrades the existing population. People get less impressive when their country's invaded. I don't know why that is. I've always noticed that.
The UK is a great example of
it. It is a great example.
Totally agree.
The Brits themselves, it's like, but they've gotten weirder and creepier over time. They've, as it's become more Pakistani, the native-born Brits, the white Brits, have become way less impressive.
That is just straight up Nazi propaganda. They're doing the poisoning the blood of our country thing in more words. Which, by the way, is some shit that is coming from the top down. That's coming from the actual fucking president in office. The fact that immigrants are poisoning the blood of the people. Who do you think the people is here? It's white people. I mean, and that's what is frightening about this, is that they are getting more and more open about which demographic they really care about here. And it's white people. They only care about white people. If you're anything darker than maybe Italian, you can get the fuck out of here as far as these people are concerned.
The entire economy has become hyper-feminized. The education system has become hyper-feminized. I'm sure you've heard those arguments. We know that. The jobs that have had the greatest emphasis of the credentialing, you know, which basically is what college is. It's just a massive credentialing exercise. They're not the more masculine jobs that we need, which is like industrial engineering, or they're HR managers. Upper middle class suburban parents do not want to tell their friends their kids are working construction.
I didn't force my own kids to work construction, to be honest.
And it's not even a matter of forcing
society changed so much.
Yeah, but it's almost...
Because when you destroyed the white working class, which they did on purpose because they hate them above all for some reason, when you destroy the white working class, then you have immigrants running everything at the bottom. And I'm not against immigrants. I like them, actually. But I'm not going to send my kids to work on a drywall crew where they're the only English speakers. So,
sure.
Yeah.
I mean, so the ag one is interesting because we're told that we need to have mass immigration or else the crops will rot in the field.
Well, Elon just sent a video out this morning of a robot making popcorn. So if a robot can make popcorn, he can pick lettuce, I think.
I would imagine. So maybe it's not about picking the crops. Maybe it's about the fact they want to change the demographics of this country.
Yeah.
And but secondly, the hospitality one, maybe, I guess, sure. How about this? Hire Americans and pay them more. There's a 7% young male unemployment rate.
It's hilarious how in one breath they will admit that it is people like them, upper and middle class white people, who refuse to send their kids to work construction jobs. I'm gonna go out on a limb here and assume that working in the fields is probably also not high up on the list of people like Charlie Kirk and Tucker Carlson to send their kids off to go do. So on the one hand, they will outright admit that, yeah, we don't really want to send our kids to go do these jobs, but also we want to stop inviting brown people in to do these jobs. It's almost like the brown people is the problem here, isn't it? Well, young men, especially young white men, for whatever reason that might be, young white men don't want to do these feminized jobs. How many big burly dudes do you know who work in hotel hospitality? So if young white men are depressed and anxious and dropping out of the workforce because the workforce is so feminized, you think that having them join the hospitality industry to work as maids and concierges and desk clerks, that's going to solve that problem? Just come out and say it, guys. There is no Jewish conspiracy, because that's what the implication is. The infamous they that they're always responding to. Nick Fuentes will say it out loud. Nick Fuentes will just say the Jews. But Tucker Carlson is talking about the Jews too. He just doesn't want to say the Jews because he knows that that's bad for his publicity. But that's who he's saying is bringing the third world into Western countries. Not recognizing, or just ignoring the fact, rather, that no one is forcing white people to not have kids, except for the fact that the wealth distribution forced by unencumbered capitalism leads to a position where people are unwilling to have kids because they cannot fucking afford it. In one breath, these people will absolutely suck off the market and say that the market can solve everything, except for when the market decides, hey, we want to keep growing because that's all capitalism is about, is infinite growth, which is not possible. But that's the idea. And once they realize, hey, the white people aren't making enough kids for us to keep growing the economy, we need to import workers. It's not that they're trying to replace white people, they're trying to keep this big capitalist machine running. And they're just co-opting the issues from that system in order to drive their white supremacy.
That was pretty normal. And it wasn't that long ago. This was the 80s. Now you can't do that because no one else working those jobs has anything in common with your children.
That's right.
They're not from here.
They're strangers.
Exactly.
And on top of that, there is a belief by upper middle class America that those are the dirtier lower class jobs.
100%.
Don't do that.
They don't even speak English.
Yes.
So it's like not even a thing.
It's a barrier to entry.
Have to send your kid to work at a clothing store in Martha's Vineyard, because if you want to work, I'm serious, if you want a working class job, what else is there?
I mean, come on. Really? The people working these jobs have nothing in common with you? Nothing at all. So you're saying that there is nothing in common with Hispanics? That's what they're saying. They're saying that white people and other races should not live amongst each other. I don't understand how you can watch this and hear anything else. Do you know how ridiculously disconnected and insulated that you have to be to think to think that sending your kid to work at some fucking boutique fashion shop in Martha's Vineyard is a good example of a working class job? Are you fucking serious? Come on, bro. This shit is a psyop.
On either a college campus from like a work, or like in Columbus, Ohio. Like when I go to a football game, no one's pitching me amnesty.
But they never want amnesty for, there's never amnesty for bank robbers or drug dealers or people convicted of hate crimes. I notice it's only
such a good point
for illegal aliens.
You notice the emphasis he put on people convicted of hate crimes? Why would he, I don't know, why do you think he would emphasize people convicted of hate crimes? Now, again, this is just me going out on a limb here, but it's almost like he feels like hate crimes are like especially okay, you know? Maybe he feels like, you know, hate crimes shouldn't be a thing. Maybe he feels like people who commit hate crimes are ideologically in the right.
So when Biden says the number one threat are straight white men, which he said about 1 million times, or what are the white nationalism or Christian nationalism? He's talking about young white men. That's what he's talking about.
About me and the young men I represent.
Bingo. Those are just dumb euphemisms.
This is one of the reasons why.
But he's afraid of them.
Of course.
I get it.
The power of, again, I hate.
My first instinct here was to disagree with this clip. But in a way, he's right. White nationalism and Christian nationalism are kind of just dumb euphemisms. But they're dumb euphemisms for white supremacy. It's not that these ideas don't exist. It's not that these ideas are not dangerous and real. It's that what they are providing cover for is just old-fashioned, classic Ku Klux Klan white supremacy. The same shit we've been dealing with for over a century now. The Klan only came around because the government officially stopped advocating for the Klan's interests. So yeah, it is a dumb euphemism. You guys should just come out and say it. You think white people are better. We know that's what you're getting at. You're making it more and more obvious every day.
For themselves. And they're the legacy, they're the heirs of Martin Luther, who took on, the 1500-year-old church by himself.
Totally.
They are people who believe they communicate directly with God, that their conscience is more important than federal law, and they're really hard to deal with. And so you have to destroy them first. And they did.
Well, they're not done yet. There's still a lot, and that's...
Well, I know some. I am one.
But by the way, even the young men that are currently lost, let's bring them back in. And that's what I'm saying.
Agree.
You can shed your addiction. You can give your life to Jesus. You can get your aim figured out. You can reorient your purpose. Again, Larry Fink is getting to something deeper. There's actually going to be a massive...
Protestant white American nationalism. Where have I heard those? Where have I heard that before? Where have I heard the strong advocacy for Protestant white American nationals who believe that their communication with God directly is more important than federal law? Where have I heard that before?
But the power of young white men in this country, if they were motivated and purposeful, young white men helped us win a world war and get to the moon and split the atom.
You better give them weed and fentanyl and benzodiazepines and DraftKings and porn just to kind of disable them so they don't rise up and eat you. That's what I would do. I'm just saying, like, if I were in charge of society, I'd be like, holy shit, I'm afraid of these guys.
You're so right. And I try to, I listen to your show all the time, Tucker. And
sorry.
When you say stuff like that, I try to challenge it. I'm like, is it really a centralized conspiracy? I'm like,
no, it's a conspiracy of instinct.
But then I'm like, I got nothing.
Also, here's this mysterious they again. Who is the, come on, Tucker, just say it. Just say it, Tucker. Just say it. Who's the mysterious they who's feeding all the white people the drugs and the alcohol and the DraftKings? Who is it? Who is it, Tucker? Because to me, it's pretty obvious. To me, it seems like the billionaire capitalist class. But I don't think that's what you think, Tucker. I think that you have a different assumption about who it is. Say it, Tucker. I want to hear you say it.
Challenge or convince, because you have one of the others, the ruling class, that this is necessary. And I don't think convincing is going to work.
No.
So you have to challenge them. And hilariously, it's actually the best thing for them.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, they're coming for their mansions, and they're coming for their assets, and they're coming for their companies. And I don't want to live in that country. I do not want to live in South Africa. I don't want to live in a resentment, bitterness country where I have to drive around in armored cars all the time and I can't leave my house after 10 p.m.
Especially, we don't even know who lives here.
I don't know if it's always been like this, but I am absolutely 100% convinced that, at least for the past 100 years or so, white supremacy is a fucking psyop. White supremacy only exists to keep working class whites from becoming class conscious and advocating for their rights as workers. That's the only reason why they push white supremacy. They push white supremacy to keep the working class divided based on the color of their skin and to keep them from rising up and demanding what's rightfully theirs.
Here.
Well, that's a whole other component.
No, but I'm just saying that makes it more volatile. So if there is a severe economic contraction, and of course at some point there will be, you're not going to have a civilian conservation corps. It's like, because the country's inherently not united and citizens have nothing in common with each other. And like,
we're a nation of strangers.
Who are my neighbors? They don't even speak my language. They don't know what the Civil War was. We're not on the same page on any level. And they have expectations that are totally unrealistic because they were getting free stuff the second they got here. So
we need to do white supremacy or else the socialists might take power. That is what their biggest fear is. Their biggest fear is having to get taxed more. That is their biggest fear. Their biggest fear is not having a huge hoard of wealth to sit on. That is their biggest fear. If we don't do a white supremacy and get rid of all the brown people, then we might have to pay more taxes. That's what they're scared of, bro. They're scared of working class solidarity, and so they try to divide us by race. It is a psyop, I swear.
You see, economic volatility is survivable if you're a nation of neighbors.
Exactly.
Because then you go to church and then you have commonality and you're like, you kind of bind together and you figure it out. Like the Great Depression, for example. We survived that because we were a different people demographically. We were different religiously. But when you're a nation of strangers filled with third worlders that don't really understand what this country is about and they're just here for free stuff socialism, watch out.
Yeah, let me translate that one for you. What he's saying there is, we only survived the Great Depression because we were mostly white back then. The only reason why the United States was able to get out of the Great Depression was because we were 90% white. It had nothing to do with New Deal policies. It had nothing to do with the top tax bracket in that period being like fucking 94%, and all the new welfare policies that were implemented back then. That had nothing to do with it. It was just the fact that we were 90% white back then. That's why we were able to get out of the Great Depression. Nothing to do with FDR. But now that we have a country full of brown people, who knows what could happen.
Here are physically removed from our country and put far away from us. That is what victory looks like. 30 million fewer invaders and putting an ocean or a gulf between them and us. And then building a giant fucking wall so they can never come back. That's what victory looks like. And if some white saviors, if some brainwashed, progressive, white liberals want to throw themselves in front of the tanks, I say run them over. And that's just a bonus. If a bunch of white saviors want to give their lives for these invaders that hate us, that take advantage of us, that have no respect for us, they want to throw themselves in front of the treads of the tanks, I say keep going. I say run them over, and we'll just say that's the bonus round. That's victory. That's what victory looks like. And I told you the other night,
I feel like I'm kind of a broken record here, but I mean that it's because they're all saying the same thing. They're all just saying it in different levels of explicitness. I'm not much of a phrenology guy, but you can't tell me that Nick Fuentes doesn't kind of look like David Duke. You know what I'm saying? I just think that's funny. I mean, come on, bro. Do I even really need to explain with Nick Fuentes why he is a fascist? Do I actually need to explain why Nick Fuentes is a fascist? The whole Great Replacement, the immigrants are invaders, yada yada yada. It's the same thing over and over again. It's just a different level of mask off with Nick Fuentes. That's really not the important part of this clip. The tank part is really do I really need to explain? Do I really need to explain why that is like fascistic authoritarianism? if people are protesting, just run them over with tanks. Tiananmen Square, anybody? I'm not saying China, well, I guess China kind of is. Like, I am a quote unquote libertarian in the what I think is like the classical sense, not in the anarcho-capitalist sense that it is used today. I'm a libertarian in that I believe I don't want the fucking government murdering people for their beliefs and shit like that.
A bunch of whites.
These guys are authoritarian. These guys are, what do you call it? Racial identitarian authoritarians. They are fascists. They are Nazis. That's what these people are. Victory, 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 victory. The reason why they keep saying victory, I said this in another clip and I'm going to keep reiterating it. Sieg Heil translates to hail victory. That's why they harp on the word victory so much. That is why they do it. It is yet another dog whistle.
Win. There is no substitute for victory. We only care about victory. And here's the grand irony. I see all these Israel critics, the JQ squad, they idolize Hitler. They worship Hitler. Do you know what Sieg Heil even means? It means hail victory. And not to go like full Nazi or something, but there is no substitute for victory. We have to win. They have to lose. And they, yes, sometimes includes white leftists that have citizenship, that were a nurse, or
brother, my friend, guys, can we be for real, bro? I don't know about you guys. I don't know about you guys. But there's not a whole lot of channels that I watch that attract people with fucking swastikas, red swastikas, in their profile pics. I don't watch a whole lot of channels where that is like a commonly occurring thing. I don't know about you, but that's just not something that I see on a regular basis unless I'm watching shit like this. Like, bro. Again, do I even really need to like go into detail as to exactly why Nick Fuentes is a fucking fascist? Like, is it not just like on its face obvious? Do I really need to explain it at this point? I don't feel like I do. I feel like I'm just gonna keep watching clips and just kind of laughing at them because that's all that I have energy for at this point. I've been interacting with these people's content for weeks and it's like rotting my brain.
To have. And what is the incentive to bring these people in? It's literally just a math equation. If you're a business,
what did he say in this clip?
Have a high fertility rate, we're going to replace the children that white.
Oh yeah, the PSYOP thing again, man. Like again, he's saying the quiet part out loud. This is the type of shit that I feel as a left-wing person obligated to call out because, you know, normies, quote unquote, don't see it. People like Nick Fuentes see it. People like Nick Fuentes know exactly what they're doing. They are using the white working class and the sentiments of racism in order to divide the working class and maintain power. People like Nick Fuentes' answer to this is that the racist sentiments need to just win out and they do need to deport all the brown people. People like me think that the working class needs to actually come together and demand our rights regardless of our fucking skin color.
With blasphemy laws, and that secular religion says, and you say that's a crock of shit. It's intentional. It's called The Open Society by Karl Popper. It's by these architects of the liberal order after World War II. They got together and they said, how can we make sure that Hitler never happens? How can we make sure that totalitarianism never happens again? And they came up with the consensus, which is that we need to take down nations, religions, fathers, the authoritarian personality. We need to be empathetic and altruistic. We need to be diverse and pluralistic. And that experiment isn't working. And I'll tell you the truth, right now, and you can laugh at this, you can scoff at this, our people are being genocided in our country. 50% of the live births in the United Kingdom and in the United States are non-white. In 100 years, my ancestors, your kids who are so empathetic and compassionate, they're gonna be a minority. They're gonna be a minority in maybe a Muslim country, an Indian country, an Hispanic country, and these Jewish people that are 100 years old talking about my grandparents and the Holocaust,
They don't care about that. Actually, they like to see it. At the SPLC, they're literally counting down the days until whites are a minority in America. So forgive me if I don't believe them when they talk about compassion. There's a genocide going on right now. It's not against the Jews.
How many Christians are there?
In Gaza, it's against
How many
whites.
Christians are there in the world? Like me and you.
The only thing that I'm even gonna bother adding to this clip is that Karl Popper was Jewish. You might have saw me pull up Google real quick just so that, cause yes, Karl Popper was Jewish. That is why he used the name Karl Popper, because that's what it comes down to for him, is it's always oh my god, I've been spending too much time on this shit. Name the Jew. That is a phrase that Nazis like to use, is to name the Jew. Like, it is a very rare person of this ilk who is willing to go out in public and quote unquote name the Jew. Like that, I've been using the phrase mask off. That's the type of thing that I like to say. They like to say things like naming the Jew. Same difference, I guess. But Nick Fuentes is just much more mask off than someone like Tucker Carlson. Tucker Carlson will just call them they.
Point some billion,
Yeah,
2 billion.
How many Jews are there?
15 million.
Okay. So with a straight face, you're going to tell me the world is being overrun by the Jewry, by 15 million people, when there are over 1 billion Christians. There is a genocide of Christians like poor old Nick Fuentes going on at the hands of these 15 million Jews. Really?
See, this attitude is why you're losing. When you say
Who
poor
am I losing
old
to?
white people,
Who
these
am I
poor
losing
old
to?
white people.
Who am I losing to?
You're seeing it, mass migration. Oh, you're losing to me. We are losing as a civilization of mass migration. And here's the difference. In Israel, they have my politics. In Israel, they want to maintain a Jewish majority. If they had it their way, it would only be Jewish people. They're fighting like hell so that Jewish people can have as much territory, a Jewish state. They can be proudly Jewish in their own land. Whereas in America, we are being besieged by 10 million illegal immigrants in 4 years.
And see, that is like the only real defining characteristic between these groups. Some of them are Jewish advocates because they think that some of them are Israel advocates because they just agree with what Israel is doing. They think that every country should be ethnically homogenous and they should ethnically cleanse other minorities. Some of them hate Jews so much that they are still not willing to advocate on behalf of Israel just because they fucking hate Jews, even if they do agree with the politics. Case in point, Mr. Fuentes.
And then whites and Christians are going to be the minority. And that's true in Canada, Australia, all the...
Great replacement theory, blah, 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 blah.
Situation is being complete.
Let me just pull up great replacement theory real quick. Cause I'm not gonna like fucking read Rene Camus' book, but I will at least show it on screen here. The great replacement theory, popularized by French or René Camus, is a debunked far-right white nationalist conspiracy theory. It falsely claims native white European populations are literally replaced by non-white immigrants, particularly Muslim-majority countries, blah, 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 blah. It's the same thing over and over again. It's the same thing Tucker Carlson is saying. It's the same thing Charlie Kirk has been saying. He's just saying it in a little bit more yikesy kind of way.
We cannot be these stupid people anymore. You cannot be in league with Barry Weiss. There is no outcome where you win. There is no outcome where Ben Shapiro and Jared Kushner are walking Trump to the Ohel to give his intention at the grave of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, and you come out on top. Does that even need to be said? There is no timeline where you see your president wearing a kippah, holding hands with Jared Kushner and Ben Shapiro to put his little note at the grave of Menachem Schneerson. And that is our guy who's gonna be Hitler. Not gonna happen. If Shapiro thinks he's their guy, and you...
Our guy who's gonna be Hitler? I'm just gonna keep going, bro. I can't.
Think he's your guy, somebody is wrong. and it ain't Shapiro, okay? If Ben Shapiro thinks that Trump is his guy and, you know, you're a heritage American or whatever, and you think Trump is your guy, one of you is wrong, and it's not the Jew. You want to know why? Because the Jews have Trump's fucking phone number and you have a Twitter account.
Dude, when I say I'm fucking exhausted, like I said, I have not slept. I did not sleep real good last night. But B, man, I have been interacting with these people's content for like weeks now, and I had to, you know, mine these interviews and mine Nick Fuentes' social media presence for clips. I've had to watch hours and hours of Nick Fuentes and Tucker Carlson and Charlie Kirk speaking. And it has been fucking grating, bro. Let me tell you, it has been absolutely soul crushing. So I really hope somebody out there gets something out of this video once it's finally uploaded. Because holy shit, did I hurt myself to make it for you. This is self-harm, people.
In 1991, the country of Somalia utterly collapses. We are legally obligated to take them in as refugees under our own laws. We bring in 80,000 Somalis from their failing shithole warlord pirate country, and we put them in Minnesota. How do they repay us? For plucking them out of anarchy and putting them in Fargo, putting them in Minnesota? They start stealing from us to the tune of $8 billion. Fuck these people. Fuck these people. They should be put in a military cargo plane and crash it into the ocean. You come here, you steal from us, we catch you with your hand in the cookie jar, you say, well, you better not investigate or else you're racist. They should be hanged. The government, forget even about deportation. These people should be given the death penalty.
Again, I don't really feel like I need to add anything to that. There is one thing that I will add. I will add that there was a small ring of, I think, like 80-something Somalis who had anything provably to do with this ring of fraud. So, but he is saying we should deport all of the Somalis, not even deport them, we should hang them or put them into a cargo plane and crash it into the ocean. This is a popular right-wing commentator. Moving on.
Remember who is responsible for it all. The Jews. They are responsible for every war in the world. It's not even debatable at this point. This has nothing to do with oil. This has nothing to do with democracy. This has nothing to do with liberal internationalism. We are at war with Iran because they pose a threat to Israel's hegemony. That's why we're bombing their nukes to pave the way for regime.
You see how they use Israel and the Jews interchangeably? That's not an accident. I too am anti-Israel. I too am against the Israel lobby and Israel's aims in the Middle East. But where we differ is that I don't just hate Jews. I'm not willing to give the 100% of America's bad behavior and just blame it on the Jews. America is interested in oil. A big part of the reason why we are invading Iran, bombing Iran anyway, we haven't invaded yet. But a big part of that is because Iran was selling shit tons of oil to China and we want that oil for the United States. That's a big part of it. Does it also help Israel? Yes. Is Israel also involved? Yes. But is it just because of the Jews? If you're a Nazi, the answer to that question is yes. I am not. I am willing to also look at the other geopolitical implications of it because I live in the fucking real world.
Change so Israel can dominate the region because that makes them the most powerful they can be. The Israeli state used American Jews. Think of this. American-born American Jews that have never known a country other than America. They were born here, they were raised here, they made their fortune here. Many of them are liberal, many of them are Democrats. They're not even right-wing, they weren't even supporters of Netanyahu. But because they are Jewish, they can be counted on and relied upon to lobby the government to bomb Iran on Israel's behalf. So don't tell me it's about oil. Don't tell me it's about democracy. Don't tell me it's nation building or neocons. And don't even tell me it's Zionists or like Kudniks. Don't tell me it's revisionist Zionists. It is Jews. Remember.
Don't really feel like I need to add much more to that. All right, I'm going to watch this interview with Tucker Carlson and this guy because now that I'm actually going back and watching this interview, I can see why I didn't really pull any clips from it. It's because it's kind of boring. Tucker Carlson basically just lets Nick Fuentes sit here and tell him how he went from, you know, just a normal kid from Chicago to being a Nazi, and does not push back on him at all. He just continues asking him questions. Okay. Oh, amazing. Interesting. And then what happened? He never offers any pushback. The only time he ever offers any pushback is when it comes to the question of condemnation of all Jews. That is the only thing that Tucker offers any level of pushback on. And I don't think that that is a coincidence. I think that it is because that Tucker Carlson knows he says right before then that he has a PhD in talking about stuff that he doesn't really believe. That sounds like a self-report to me. I'm not gonna lie. I don't even know what else he could be referring to when he says that. That just sounds like him saying he has a PhD in that subject. And I think that the reason he has a PhD in that subject is because he oftentimes talks about how he is not racist and is not an anti-Semite, when in reality he is. But he has to provide cover for himself, and so that he can, you know, so that he can save face in the public eye, as opposed to someone like Nick Fuentes, who was just completely mask off about it. But that's the only time he really offers any pushback during this entire interview, so it's kind of boring, actually. But I do think that aspect of it is kind of interesting. I would even go so far as to say I think it is inherently a condemnation of Tucker in that he could not really find anything to push back on Nick Fuentes about other than using the phrase "the Jews." I think that in and of itself kind of tells you where Tucker's head really is on all of this stuff. He's in the same place as Nick Fuentes is. He's just not willing to say it with his whole fucking chest like Nick is. And even Nick holds back a little bit from what he really thinks. Just a little bit, though. And honestly, I guess depending on which clip you're looking at, I'm not even really sure how much he holds back.
Religion is the idea that neoconservatism and Israel has nothing to do with Jewishness, Jewish identity, the Jewish religion, because clearly the state of Israel and the neocons are deeply motivated by that ethnic identity, and their allegiance to Israel proceeds from that. You know, the plan of Greater Israel, the blood and soil nationalism of Israel, it stems from this ethno-religion, which is Judaism.
Well, this is, just BLM, the new version. This is identity politics. They're engaging in identity politics. I mean, that's just so obvious to me. But the problem in your response, I get what you're saying, but the problem in your response is it does not apply to every individual.
No, and I would never say that.
Okay.
Remember who is responsible for it all: the Jews.
Just craven fucking hypocrites. They harangue the left about their obsession with identity politics, which I am on principle against identity politics. I don't believe in fucking black nationalism any more than I believe in white nationalism. But these people are only against identity politics when the left does it. When it's the right doing it, when they are white nationalists, they're all fucking for it. And that, again, tells you everything that you need to know. They're just Nazis. I wanted to take a quick look at some of Stephen Miller's speech from Charlie Kirk's memorial.
Cannot terrify us. Victory in his name.
Before we start this speech, for almost 3 decades, Jared Taylor has been publishing his ideas about race at the American Renaissance magazine, now a website called AmRen, which is considered a mouthpiece for white supremacist ideology. This is fucking NPR, bro. This is not a left wing. This is not a leftist outlet. This is literally fucking NPR. Let's see. The races are not identical and equivalent, says Taylor, who calls himself a race realist and rejects the white supremacist label. Of course, they always want to reject the white supremacist label because they know it's not good PR. Patterns of difference. This is now something that's considered a huge hateful taboo in the United States. Website is not well known outside white nationalist circles. I wonder why that is. The website is not well known outside white nationalist circles, but it found an audience in the White House advisor Stephen Miller. Miller has recommended articles on AmRen and another white nationalist website called VDare. We know this because the SPLC has uncovered hundreds of emails that Miller wrote to a reporter at Breitbart News before he worked in the White House. I just wanted to point out Storm. Let's see. Nazi dog whistle. Well, look at that. That's not exactly what I was planning to pull up, but that is perfectly apt. First thing that comes up is Stormfront, which is a neo-Nazi website. Another website that I wanted to talk about is American Renaissance. Race differences, white advocacy, third world immigration, anti-white racism, white identity. It's a white supremacist website, as will be, confirmed by any number of, more reputable websites that you might check out. Jared Taylor, an American white supremacist, editor of American Renaissance. I'm not even going to go any further than that. The people who advocate this type of shit are always talking about how everything that disavows them, everything that calls them a white supremacist is just leftist propaganda. If you believe that, I hate to break it to you, you have been inundated with white supremacist idea or with white supremacist propaganda yourself. NPR is not like a liberal organization. It is literally like a straight down the line, just reports the fact type of deal, and they very openly call American Renaissance a white supremacist website.
The day that Charlie died, the angels wept, but those tears had been turned into fire in our hearts. And that fire burns with a righteous fury that our enemies cannot comprehend or understand. When I see Erica and her strength and her courage, I'm reminded of a famous expression. The storm whispers to the warrior that you cannot withstand my strength. And the warrior whispers back, I am the storm. Erica is the storm. We are the storm.
Yeah. But anyway, storm imagery. Warrior whispers back, I am the storm. Erica is the storm. I guess we're kind of getting ahead of ourselves here, but people rise up, the storm, break loose. The original stormtroopers, people think of them as, people think of them as I'm sorry, I did not sleep well last night. I'm really tired, so I keep losing my train of thought. But people think of them as like the iconic white armored Star Wars characters. That is not where that term came from. German stormtroopers, Sturmtruppen, originated in World War I as elite, highly trained assault units designated to break the trench warfare, blah, 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 blah. Stormtroopers from Imperial Germany. The term I don't know how the fuck to pronounce that, but you see what it says. Predates the founding of the Nazi Party in 1919. But, okay, so Stormtroopers predate the Nazis, but I promise you, there is a reason why. Where is it? There's a reason why ChatGPT comes up with this comparison. Stormfront, historical roots. The term often references, there we go, the SA, also known as the Stormtroopers, Hitler's original paramilitary wing. And that's the thing, man, is like, these people, there's a reason why they do this the way that they do it. There's a reason why they use dog whistles, and they do it to maintain plausible deniability, so that you can never pin them down exactly. They're just going to say, oh, well, all I said was storm, and you got your liberals' hair caught on fire, because that's the whole point. That's why they do it this way, is because it lends them plausible deniability, but they know exactly what they're doing. So I just want to set the stage. The term storm can function as a Nazi dog whistle, particularly in specific political or online contexts that reference cleansing or the rise of a master race. Now, they never use this phrase because they know that that's a little bit mask off, right? But they will often talk about cleansing things. They will talk about blood being poisoned. They will talk about storms a lot. Storms is the phrase is essential tenet of QAnon conspiracy. Oh, that's a new one, actually. Hypothetical event involving mass arrest of political enemies. Wow. While not exclusively Nazi, it is frequently used by far-right groups and can overlap with anti-Semitic tropes. I didn't even know that was going to be there. But, you know, I feel like that kind of... Because the thing about this is, like, despite the fact that all these ideologies kind of overlap and interact with each other, they're not all exactly the same. Like, Stephen Miller is particularly interesting because Stephen Miller himself is Jewish. And so the fact that he is a white nationalist sympathizer is interesting because, you know, depending on, like I said, how far, I'm not exactly sure which order I'm going to upload these clips in, but there's another clip where I mentioned that, you know, there are some other races involved, like Nick Fuentes himself is fucking half Hispanic. The guy who was the mascot for the Proud Boys was like a Cuban. And the thing is, they use that as cover for, you know, the actual true ideologies. There's another thing that I wanted to show here. Proud Boys. Notable members. NSC 131 founder Chris Hood's involvement in the white supremacist community dates back to 2017. It was since the Proud Boys Patriot Front the base after leaving the Proud Boys. His activism with Patriot Front propelled him to the position Northeast Regional Director. However, Hood was disappointed in Patriot Front's lack of violence, promoting him to create his own group, the New England Nationalists. That's what these people do. They create all these different clubs with all these different euphemistic names, and they just pass their memberships back and forth to each other, and some of them are more radicalized than others. Some, like, there's an article that I saw earlier today. I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to find, or it wasn't earlier today, it was a little while ago, but there's an article that I saw a little while ago that talked about how the Proud Boys had fractured after the Proud Boys had fractured after January 6th because so many of them got arrested and there was a big crackdown, and the ideology of the group started to splinter because some of them thought that the whole civic nationalist, Western chauvinist idea, they thought, you know, they took that at face value, like that was as far as it was going to go. But shock of all shocks, that wasn't it. A lot of those guys are just straight up white supremacists, and so they left the Proud Boys in order to join groups like this, just out and out neo-Nazi groups. Because, again, all of these groups are intermingled.